When we think about knights, we often think of the Templars, King Arthur, Lancelot, and bloody jousting battles. European knights were much more than a gimmick, however. They were central to warfare and society for almost all of the medieval period. Knights were noble cavalrymen who fought for their country and their god. Here we're exploring some of the lesser-known facts about medieval knights and the things they got up to. Number 1. License to kill. In the world of medieval warfare, knights were more than just heavily armored warriors on horseback. They were symbols of power, social order, and sanctioned violence. One of the most intriguing and lesser-known aspects of a knight's role in medieval society was the concept of being licensed to kill. This idea wasn't just a dramatic turn of phrase. It was in many cases a formal status granted to knights through specific legal and royal protections. During the Middle Ages, many knights operated under official documents known as letters of protection or letters of retainer. These legal instruments were issued by monarchs, nobles, or military commanders, and acted as guarantees of legal immunity. When a knight received such a letter, it meant that if he killed someone during battle, in the course of fulfilling his duties or while enforcing the law, he would not face prosecution. These letters served as a practical recognition that warfare, especially feudal and crusading warfare, was inherently violent, and that those committing acts of violence under legal or noble command needed to be protected from civil or ecclesiastical penalties. The scope of this immunity extended to both military engagements and certain law enforcement roles. For example, knights serving as royal agents or enforcers of feudal justice could use force, including lethal force, against outlaws, rebellious peasants, or rival factions. In these situations, the license to kill was more than symbolic. It allowed knights to maintain order or fulfill military objectives without fear of being dragged into court or excommunicated. The idea of legal immunity was also tied to the broader social status of knights. Since knights were usually drawn from the nobility, their privileged legal standing reflected their elevated social rank. Killing outside of battle wasn't always legal, but in the right context, such as suppressing a rebellion or executing royal orders, it could be justified and protected. This legal shield helped reinforce a knight's authority over lower classes and rivals, solidifying his role as an instrument of sanctioned violence. During the Crusades, this concept took on an even broader form. Papal endorsements of holy wars often came with full absolution for knights who killed infidels in battle. The Church granted spiritual immunity, declaring that such killings were not sins but acts of divine justice. In this way, knights were not only protected by secular law, but were spiritually rewarded for taking lives in the name of Christianity. What makes this concept so fascinating today is how different it was from modern understandings of justice and warfare. The medieval license to kill was an intersection of class privilege, military necessity, and religious ideology. Knights were essentially armed agents of the ruling order, given both legal and moral justification to use deadly force. While not all killings were excused, knights could still be punished for crimes like murder outside of combat. The protections they enjoyed were far beyond what any ordinary soldier or peasant could expect. This overlooked aspect of medieval knighthood shows how power, law, and violence were deeply intertwined during the era. Number 2. The power of the lance. Among the many weapons that medieval knights mastered, the lance held a position of exceptional importance. While modern audiences often associate knights with swords thanks to myths like King Arthur and Excalibur, in actual medieval combat, the lance was the primary and most devastating weapon used by mounted knights. The design and use of the lance were central to the effectiveness of cavalry charges, which were one of the most feared tactics on the battlefield. A knight charging at full speed on a powerful destrier, with a tightly gripped lance aimed at an enemy's shield or armor, could deliver an impact with incredible force, enough to unhorse a rider or pierce chainmail and even plate armor. Lances were typically between 9 and 14 feet long, and made from hardwood like ash or oak, chosen for strength and flexibility. They were often tipped with iron or steel points and sometimes equipped with a vamplate, a small circular guard that prevented the lance from sliding backward through the knight's hand on impact. The sheer momentum of a cavalry charge magnified the force of the lance strike, making it the medieval equivalent of a high-speed missile. Knights trained for years in mounted combat, and handling a lance effectively required precision, strength, and timing. Training often began in childhood and included jousting tournaments, which weren't just public spectacles but also practical combat training. In these controlled competitions, knights learned to aim, balance, and manage the shock of impact. Jousting helped develop the skills needed for real battle scenarios, where the stakes were life and death. The psychological effect of a massed cavalry charge with lances lowered was equally powerful. For infantry facing such a charge, the sight of armored knights bearing down at full speed was terrifying, and often caused lines to break before physical contact was even made. The lance represented not just military force, but the authority and prestige of the knightly class. Although the lance was incredibly effective, it was also a single-use weapon in most combat situations. Upon the initial clash, the lance would often shatter, bend, or be dropped. At that point, knights transitioned to their secondary weapons, typically swords, maces, or axes, for close-quarters combat. However, the sword, while iconic, was more of a backup weapon during the first intense moments of battle. What makes the lance so significant is how it shaped the structure and tactics of medieval warfare. Castles and battlefield formations were designed in part to withstand or counter the devastating impact of lance-based cavalry charges. Even armor evolved in response, with heavier designs and reinforced joints to withstand lance strikes. Knight's armor included features like lance rests on breastplates to help stabilize the weapon during a charge. The use of the lance is a reminder that medieval combat was not just brute strength, but also highly strategic and technical. The power of the lance helped define knightly warfare for centuries and played a major role in the dominance of cavalry in medieval Europe. Number 3, extensive training. Becoming a knight in the medieval era required far more than just wealth and noble birth. It demanded years of rigorous training, discipline, and physical endurance starting from early childhood. The process was long and demanding, beginning as early as the age of 7 and taking about 14 years before a young noble could be considered ready for the battlefield. The first stage in this journey was serving as a page. A page was not only a servant in a noble household, but also an apprentice in knightly culture. Pages performed tasks such as running messages, setting tables, and maintaining weapons. But beyond these duties, they began their early martial education. They learned basic sword handling, practiced with wooden weapons, and started riding horses. Interestingly, many of their lessons were taught through structured games designed to develop coordination, strength, and strategic thinking. Unlike modern childhood games, these were often combat-themed exercises using blunted weapons like wooden maces and mock shields to simulate real battle conditions in a safer environment. Alongside physical training, pages were also instructed in courtly manners, music, dancing, reading, and religious education, all critical for the development of a well-rounded knight who was expected not only to fight, but also to represent the values of chivalry, loyalty, and piety. At around the age of 14, a successful page would advance to become a squire, assuming he was physically capable and mentally prepared. This marked a serious escalation in training. As a squire, the young trainee served directly under an experienced knight, often accompanying him into battle or on military campaigns. Squires were responsible for maintaining their knight's armor, caring for his horse, and learning firsthand about battlefield tactics and leadership. They also trained daily in swordsmanship, jousting, archery, hand-to-hand combat, and horseback riding. These were not occasional lessons, but an intense and structured routine intended to forge the squire into a capable and disciplined warrior. During this period, squires also participated in mock battles, tournaments, and real skirmishes if circumstances allowed, which provided valuable combat experience in a controlled or semi-controlled environment. Additionally, squires continued to be educated in noble etiquette, diplomacy, and religious practices. A knight was not just a soldier, but also a representative of their lord or monarch. So the ability to act with dignity in both the battlefield and the court was essential. By the age of 21, a squire who had proven himself honorable, loyal and skilled, would undergo the knighting ceremony, often during a formal event such as a feast, battle preparation, or religious celebration. The ceremony itself involved rituals like an overnight vigil, prayers, blessings from clergy, and finally the symbolic dubbing with a sword. This moment marked not only a personal transformation but also public recognition of the years of dedication it took to reach knighthood. Far from being a simple title, becoming a knight required discipline, endurance, and a lifelong commitment to martial excellence and moral duty. Number 4. Tournaments of life or death. Medieval knightly